And good afternoon. It's so great to have you here. Thank you so much for being with us. We so appreciate that you are with us tonight for what promises to be an outstanding conversation between Carol Leonnig and Warren Olney. I'm Janice Kaminer-Resnick, and it's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of our leadership team, former Congressman Mel Levine and former Los Angeles County Supervisor Zev Yaroslavsky. Tonight, we are honored to welcome back Carol Leonnig, a five-time Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. How lucky are we to spend an hour with one of the nation's top investigative reporters. Welcome, Carol, and thank you for sharing your newest book, Injustice, about the state of our Department of Justice. And by the way, I'm reading it. It reads like a novel. Unfortunately, it's not a novel. It's actually true. I highly recommend it. For those of you who prefer novel reading to nonfiction, it's great. And for those of you who prefer nonfiction, you'll find this very illuminating. And welcome back. And thank you to tonight's moderator, the exceptional Warren Olney. Warren spent decades as an iconic TV news anchor and a reporter at several major stations in Washington, D.C. and in Los Angeles before moving primarily into radio. He was the host and executive producer of the nationally syndicated Public Radio International weekday afternoon program, To the Point, and for decades he hosted KCRW's wildly popular local public affairs show, Which Way LA. We are deeply grateful that he is such a valued part of the America at a Crossroads community. Just briefly, looking ahead, next Wednesday, staff writer for The New Yorker, the great Susan Glasser, will be in conversation with Madeline Brand to discuss collapsing norms. Can American democracy survive this stress test? And the following week, military historian and Washington Post columnist, he is still with the Washington Post, in the opinion section, Max Boot, who will be in conversation with Stanford's Larry Diamond. What is the end game, U.S. policy, and the future of Venezuela and beyond? Of course, he'll talk about Ukraine and what's going on internationally in various conflicts around the world. We have many great programs planned as we continue to bring you America's leading analysts addressing the most consequential issues of our time. We are grateful to our audience, to all of you. You are the community that makes these conversations possible. You can register for all of our upcoming programs at the bottom of the email you'll get as tonight's program concludes. Also in that email are a couple of terrific articles, as well as a particularly moving sermon delivered by Rabbi Adam Kligfeld of Temple Beth Am in Los Angeles on the topic of ICE and what is transpiring in Minneapolis. I highly recommend that sermon to you. It will be 15 minutes very well spent. And now it is my great pleasure to turn the program over to Warren Olney, who will begin our conversation with Carol Leonnig. Warren, over to you.
Janice, thanks so much. As you indicated, Carol Leonnig is a highly regarded investigative reporter. During 25 years at the Washington Post, she won 5 Pulitzer Prizes. She wrote 3 best-selling books along the way. Last year, she joined the cable network MS Now. Last year also, she and her Post colleague, Aaron C. Davis, published a book called Injustice. The book took 2 years. They interviewed 250 people. One reviewer called it jaw-dropping. Others say it's depressing, but everybody agrees it's important. The subtitle tells it all: How Politics and Fear Vanquished America's Justice Department. Carol Leonnig, welcome back to America at a Crossroads. Great to have you.
Warren, thank you for having me, and thank you to Janice for the lovely intro. I always enjoy the conversations, and I keep coming back, and I hope I'm invited again.
As you know, you and I will chat a bit, and then I'll read questions that the audience is submitting on chat. They're already in the process of submitting the questions. It's a very interesting topic, and they're going to be with it. In your book, which focuses, of course, on the Justice Department, let me begin another way. When Joe Biden introduced Merrick Garland as his Attorney General, he said this: "I want to be clear to those who lead this department who you will serve. You won't work for me. You are not the president or the vice president's lawyer. Your loyalty is not to me, it's to the law, the Constitution, the people of this nation, to guarantee justice." When Pam Bondi introduced Donald Trump to the Department of Justice, the staff wasn't even invited to go to the Great Hall in the Justice Department, the building. And she said that she was very happy to serve at the directive of Donald Trump. What's the importance of the difference between those introductions, and how important do you think it'll be to the Justice Department in the future?
I'm so glad you focus on those two moments, the moments which we highlighted in two parts of the book, because they are so jarringly different. Um, Joe Biden, for whatever his flaws and positives, was very clear that he wanted to turn the page on the presidency of Donald Trump, the first one, which had involved him trying to manipulate essentially the Department of Justice for his political and personal errands to achieve his political goals. And he largely failed, by the way, in his first presidency to make that happen, to make the Department of Justice his whipping boy. Pam Bondi made very clear, both in that Great Hall speech and later on, that she is the president's errand girl. There's no other way to put it. She made that clear in her testimony today before the House Judiciary Committee, which was just a shocking display of doubling over herself to show her fealty to Donald Trump. At one point, mentioning the high levels of the Dow and the stock market to emphasize how great a president Donald Trump was, rather than answer the questions about her department. Why, you ask, why is it so important? The White House has always agreed, and its occupants have always agreed since Nixon to leave the Department of Justice to the very important decisions of who to prosecute, how to enforce the laws, and when to show leniency, what kind of crimes have been committed, what the evidence is, and whether or not to bring charges. And now we have a president who, for the first time since Nixon, is directing directing the Department of Justice as his domain and as his errand, as his tool to achieve what he wants, often to punish people he considers his enemies and critics.
What about the staff, permanent staff of the department, or at least semi-permanent, and many of them are resigning, as I understand it today, or over the last few weeks. Um, and when they were watching Pam Bondi introduce the president, you talked to some of them about how they felt about it and what they said. What has been their consensus, do you think? And again, how important is that to the future of justice in the United States?
Great question. We have a scene in the book in Injustice in which people are watching career prosecutors who've, devoted their lives to this mission. It's really a calling for many of these individuals to stand up in court each day and say, I'm Carol Leonnig here for the United States of America. Their jaws were dropping as they heard Pam Bondi describe working at the directive of Donald Trump. And the reason their jaws were on the floor was this had never happened before. There were other weird things about that Great Hall event. As you mentioned smartly, the staff were not invited. The Great Hall is a place where the Attorney General brings together the soldiers of justice. And instead, he brought together a lot of donors and VIPs and sort of the regular folks who really are the engine of justice were not welcome. They could watch it on Zoom. So the long-term problem, Warren, is in every way the leaders of the Department of Justice and the White House have communicated to the career staff, sometimes in direct ways, sometimes more subtle ways. You will be loyal to the president's wishes, no matter whether they comport with the law or the evidence or the facts. You will do this or you will lose your job. And many people have decided ever since that moment in the Great Hall to flee, to look for jobs in law firms, jobs that probably are very, very lucrative, but that they eschewed because they loved the mission, the public mission.
Describe how the first Attorney General for President Trump just met with the staff and what he told them about how they should behave and what they should do
The first, do you mean President Trump's first
in his
presidency?
first term. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, I'm thinking of Jeff Sessions, who was the first, and then later it was Bill Barr. But Sessions, understood essentially how the Department of Justice had historically worked, even though he had not himself had a lot of experience as a federal prosecutor. He was a lawyer who understood the Department of Justice's mission, and he wanted the White House to be separate, as did Bill Barr. And I'd like to underscore Bill Barr's example because while he is reviled in a lot of progressive communities and in Democratic political circles as, this person who really whitewashed the investigation of Robert Mueller, by Robert Mueller of Donald Trump in the first presidency, he underlined this even more significantly with Donald Trump. And I wrote about it in one of my books about the Trump presidency, the first one. He basically scolded the president, his boss, and said, stop saying you want to indict this person or that person. At that time, the president was trying to get Barr to prosecute James Comey, Andrew McCabe, the former deputy director of the FBI, and also, for some reason, Hillary Clinton. And Barr said, look, even if there was something there, as soon as you tell me to do it, that case is over. That is, he didn't explain all of this to Donald Trump, but he knew it would be a motion to dismiss for vindictive prosecution and told the president to quit it, basically. And for a long time, really did temper Donald Trump, and he did not scream as loudly for those kinds of scalps the way he is doing successfully in his second presidency.
So has the staff ever been told that directly that they need to accrue to the president's wishes and do everything that he wants or lose their jobs?
In this second presidency, yes. We have reporting that senior aides, I'm going to speak carefully just because some of this is still in, reporting mode, and I'll just say what we can say, that senior aides in the Justice Department have told people, our boss is Donald Trump, get with the program or you'll be out. And the proof is in the pudding, Warren. I mean, Eric Seibert, U.S. Attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia, a pretty important U.S. Attorney's Office of federal prosecutors, very well known for its national security and anti-terrorism cases based in Alexandria, Virginia, just outside D.C. That U.S. attorney was chosen by Donald Trump, but when he warned and resisted prosecuting Comey, the former FBI director, and New York Attorney General Letitia James, Donald Trump basically said, I'm going to fire you. I'm going to fire that guy. And he resigned under pressure. Then Donald Trump installed a person who had zero experience as a prosecutor, Lindsay Halligan, who within days proceeded to seek to and successfully indicted Mr. Comey.
Uh, I haven't gotten to the book yet, but it's so interesting to talk about what's going on now. What about the failure to get an indictment from a grand jury, civilian grand jury, against the former military officers who, including Senator Kelly of California, who warned or didn't warn, but who reminded military people, soldiers in the field, that they didn't have to obey illegal orders.
This was really gobsmacking as well. Warren, I want to underscore for the audience that I try not to sound shocked all the time, but there have been some watershed moments in this Department of Justice under Pam Bondi and ultimately under Donald Trump, since he's the boss of the department, or what he called himself, the chief law enforcement officer of the country. It was a watershed moment when Jim Comey was indicted because the evidence that he had lied to Congress, which was the charge, was so thin as to be confusing once even the indictment was spelled out and read in documents. The next watershed moment for me, at least as a reporter who's written a lot about this, was this attempt to indict six Democratic lawmakers. These senators, what did they do? They produced a video stating what the law and the military code calls for and actually requires. Don't follow an illegal order. Stating the truth in a video, it's sort of impossible to countenance how that could meet the legal standard for seditious conspiracy, which is what these lawmakers were being accused of in a grand jury yesterday.
So what does that say then about the competence of the staff at this point and the direction they're getting from Pam Bondi?
Well, I don't know that Pam Bondi was the person who said, do this.
Hmm.
I do know that the U.S. Attorney in D.C. was supportive of this. Her name's often known as Judge Janine or Janine Pirot. She and two of her two top deputies proceeded to present this. I don't believe it means that they are terrible lawyers. I believe that at the minimum, it means that grand jurors were advised what the law requires for probable cause to believe this crime was committed, and there was no basis. I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I joke that I play one on TV, but this is so demonstrably ridiculous.
Well, let's go back to the book and report about Merrick Garland and the delay that took place that was apparently ultimately fatal to prosecuting the president for what appeared to be, to Jack Smith and others, provable crimes.
Yes. Merrick Garland is a 24-year appellate court judge who had a stellar reputation as an appellate judge. Brilliant legal mind, very thoughtful, liked to call shots down the middle, careful, thorough, fairly conservative, and I don't mean politically, conservative in terms of wanting to get the law exactly right and not stretching outside any of the lines. But when he was basically blocked from becoming a nominee for the Supreme Court and getting onto the Supreme Court as President Obama had proposed, Joe Biden comes along as president and names him his new attorney general. That was because Ron Klain, Biden's chief of staff, had been a longtime friend of Merrick Garland's and thought this is a great guy with a great moderate down the middle resume who can restore faith in an apolitical Justice Department. But the problem was that Merrick Garland's wonderful and noble intentions ended up killing the ability to really properly hold Donald Trump to account for interfering in a federal and a free and fair election. I could go on, but I'll let you ask me another question.
Well, I think I'll ask you to explain some of the things that you said. One of them is that by trying not to be political, Merrick Garland ended up being political.
Yes, nail hit on head there, Warren. People who worked for Merrick Garland and really, revered him and chose to serve him in the Department of Justice said exactly that to us, that they were disappointed that ultimately his decision not his decision to be so above reproach by appearing apolitical and not pursuing open evidence of a crime without fear or favor ended up being a political decision. And that's actually what was the spur for Aaron Davis, my co-author, and I to write this book. We were working on a story together at the Washington Post about a tip I had gotten that the investigation had never really gotten started under Garland at the Department of Justice, looking at this interference by Trump and his allies. And I didn't really believe it was probably true. And then we ended up confirming that they hadn't begun anything until basically the first 2 months, first 4 months of 2022. And the question I had, and Aaron did too, was why? Why did the government not why did the Department of Justice not do what it normally does? Pursue without fear or favor. Democratic justice departments, if you will, led by Democratic appointees, have investigated and prosecuted Democrats and Republicans, prominent ones. Republican-led administrations at the Department of Justice have prosecuted and convicted prominent Democrats and Republicans. Why was Trump different?
Why?
Well, we did come to the conclusion, and our reporting reveals that 3 different times, investigators on the ground, sometimes not very prominent investigators, sometimes FBI agents, pressed from December 2020 until February 2022 for the Department of Justice to investigate Trump and his allies and what looked like a conspiracy to block Biden's victory and for Trump to hold on to power. And each of these times they were rebuffed. The rebuffing, we learned, was a mixture of things. One was primarily Merrick Garland wanting to steer away from anything that appeared political. He said privately and publicly, it is to his aides, it is not enough to be apolitical. We have to seem and appear apolitical. It ended up that we learned the Department of Justice only began its investigation of Trump, and really they wouldn't name him as a subject. They named his campaign as a subject, but they only began it after being really humiliated and embarrassed that the Congressional House Select Committee on January 6th, news of what they were learning started to leak out, and that those leaks were very embarrassing for the Justice Department. Someone else had gotten basically the first footprints in the snow in this major crime.
You also report that there were staff people who were reluctant to move ahead because of the way that Trump had behaved toward other staff people when he found out what they were doing. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so I understand your question, but correct me if I didn't. In the first presidency, which Aaron and I covered in real time, the first Trump presidency, we saw his efforts to manipulate the Justice Department. He wasn't exactly very secretive about it, right? He was tweeting, we need to indict Jim Comey, or we need to lock up Hillary Clinton, or Michael Flynn is a good man. And covering that in real time, it was clear what Donald Trump was trying to accomplish. But what we didn't appreciate until we went back and dug deeper as book reporters was the damage and the scar tissue that Trump inflicted and left behind. He had so sort of viciously singled out individual career public servants for humiliation, for investigation. He had his congressional allies investigate certain FBI officials that were really on the ground floor of the Russia investigation. He mimicked an orgasm of an FBI official who was having an extramarital affair with an FBI lawyer on national television. And these scars went deep, and people were afraid of, especially inside the FBI, afraid of toying with Donald Trump again.
So Merrick Garland delayed for a long time and then finally appointed Jack Smith as the special prosecutor to take it on. Tell us a bit about his efforts, and which were extremely energetic, I take it, and he did an awful lot in a very short time. Unfortunately, not enough.
Yeah. You summarized that well, Warren. So I'm going to just help with the timeline just a tad. So remember, the Department of Justice begins after being embarrassed by what's leaking out about what the House Select Committee is finding. Really, the House Select Committee investigators were like a little U.S. Attorney's Office. Amazing. That happens around late January 2022. Mid-April 2022, the FBI finally agrees to join, and there is a full investigation that begins. But again, Merrick Garland, benefit of the doubt, always leans on the side of being conservative and careful and cautious. Labor Day, he shuts down all the investigations, both the classified documents probe, which we haven't talked about very much, the probe into Donald Trump's absconding with hundreds and hundreds of pages of top secret records, also shuts down the investigation of the election interference on the argument, which is pretty unusual, that Donald Trump, um, there's a 60-day rule at the Department of Justice. You aren't supposed to take overt investigative steps about a candidate for office 60 days before their election. Garland decides to shut everything down anyway from Labor Day until the election on the argument that Donald Trump is a very important Republican leader, effectively the head of the party, and that it would be inappropriate to continue to investigate him and his campaign. That threw a lot of people for a loop. Like, why are you doing that? That's bending over backwards. So then Jack Smith's appointed a couple days after Donald Trump announces for re-election, November 18th, 2022. And Smith, we describe as kind of a bionic man. He has just broken his leg, fractured it in multiple places. He's in the hospital when Merrick Garland calls him and says, "Would you take the job if I appointed you?" What Merrick Garland doesn't know is that Jack Smith is in so much pain and is so wrecked that they've moved him to a different ward of the hospital because he's screaming at night when his painkillers wear off and waking everybody up. He takes himself off painkillers so he can take the oath of office without being under the undue influence of narcotics. Also, pretty unusual guy. And and then begins a sprint to gather evidence with the existing investigative teams, both teams, election interference and classified documents, um, and tell some of them, look, let's make a decision about whether we're going to indict in 3 months. I have never seen a case brought as quickly as these two cases.
And apparently brought effectively, and yet they didn't go through.
Yeah, unlike
What role did the Chief Justice of the United States play in preventing that from ever happening?
the Chief Justice alone, I don't think we can put it all on the Chief Justice, but um, two things happened, and I think they're really telling. In January of 2023, if I'm remembering my timeline correctly, there are two fairly enormous cases coming down the pike. Jack Smith asks the Supreme Court in a formal pleading for an expedited hearing on immunity claims that Donald Trump will make about him being immune as a president to take certain actions, immune from criminal prosecution. Jack Smith knows this is going to go to the Supreme Court. Let's get it, sort of settled as soon as we can. The other case that comes down the pike is in Colorado, where Donald Trump is fighting to stay on the ballot because in Colorado, the state has a rule that you cannot be on the ballot for the presidency if you have been charged with insurrection, if you've been involved in an insurrection. And they conclude at the state that Donald Trump meets this definition, and they're questioning whether he can be on the ballot. The Supreme Court decides to give expedited hearing to the Colorado case and rules in Donald Trump's favor. They refuse to give expedited hearing to Jack Smith. It's a critical moment, and the trial judge who is planning to conduct and preside over the trial of Donald Trump for election interference and trying to use the tools of his office to illegally stay in power, she and her chief judge when they see that decision by the Supreme Court, just that little decision, no expedited hearing, they stop planning for a trial. They know there won't be enough time.
You report that the Chief Justice did send a note to other justices on the court having to do with this.
I did, and he made the argument that this was an incredibly important decision and that they had to wrestle with it. He also set the time frame so that it would take a long time before they reached their decision. It was not until uh, July that at the end of their proceedings, the end of that session, that they agreed to hear the case and make a ruling.
Did the majority, well, you don't know, but you can't report on the inner workings of the Supreme Court. That's one place I don't believe you've gotten yet, but perhaps you will at some point, and good luck in the effort. But the question I've always wondered about is that's gives such power to the court relative to the other branches of government, that it seems to me it happened awfully quickly and under circumstances that make it hard to think it's going to last very long. Although, of course, court decisions last forever. And
You know what's so interesting? I'm glad you pause on this. It's true. The Supreme Court's not my expertise. Where it intersects with this, I know a good bit about. I think one of the most gripping moments in Injustice that gives you a flavor of who Merrick Garland is. Merrick Garland had sat for 24 years on a bench that was the bench that basically the training bench to go to the Supreme Court.
yeah.
The U.S. District Court of Appeals, U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, forgive me. And he knew every single one of the Supreme Court justices intellectually, personally, some of them as good friends. He had served with, I'm going to take a stab here and say three-fourths of them.
Hmm.
He knew each of them very, very well. And when the justice's opinion was rendered in the immunity case, he was expecting there to be a finding that Trump might be immune in some elements of his presidency, and there'd be a debate about where the line was. But when he read the opinion, he turned to his aides in his conference room and said, they know they're wrong. You know, this is not a firebrand judge. This is a very moderate judge who's obviously appointed by a Democratic president. Just got, just sort of, again, his jaw on the floor that they could reach such a broad decision. One of his aides said they just overruled Nixon. If this had been the law of the land, the Supreme Court would never have ordered the release of the tapes that ultimately led to President Nixon resigning because he knew the tapes would show his role in the cover-up of Watergate.
So I'm tempted to go to the chat section now because one of the very first questions is how much of the court's majority decisions in favor of Trump's side reflects their true beliefs? How much reflects fear of mega threats?
I can't be inside the heart of the justices. I will tell you, I feel that I know fairly firmly, based on interviews that have been given in the wake of this decision and things that the justices have said before, that there's a core part of that conservative majority that served Republican presidents in the White House counsel's office or in the Justice Department and has a very strong belief in the unitary executive in the and believes it is wrong for anyone to second guess a president in their decisions that must be made to save, to protect the nation from attack, to shore up national security, and that a president can't be worrying about being prosecuted in those circumstances.
When you mention the unitary executive, you have mentioned evoke the name of Stephen Miller. What about his view on that, and what more do you know than we've heard from him, or can you just draw conclusions from what we have heard about how he feels and how close he is also to President Trump? Trump has had people close to him and pushed them away at some point when whatever they were saying turned out not to be favorably received by others. Is Miller in any kind of trouble given what's happening, or is it the other way around?
I think that Donald Trump views Stephen Miller as an essential asset to his unbridled power over the country and over each of yeah, everything from Venezuela to Minneapolis to Greenland. Um, Stephen Miller has his hand in it and is giving Donald Trump the justification and the clearance, essentially, to say this is legal, this is appropriate, and we're not going to play by the norms of the past or even the laws of the past. Um, in regard to injustice, Stephen Miller is the secret hand pushing for, in those first few days of the second Trump presidency, we describe Stephen Miller being the person pressuring the acting deputy attorney general to fire wholesale prosecutors who were involved in investigating Trump. All of the leadership of the FBI, the entire seventh floor of executives, centuries worth of experience walked out the door at Miller's insistence. And so he has been the de facto attorney general in many ways from day one.
Centuries worth of experience. That applies to one of the Justice Department sections that had 33 people that now has two. Remind me what that is and tell our audience.
Yeah. So this is a very sad moment, gripping moment in the book. I feel like it's chapter 33, but we'll see if my memory serves. It happens the week of Valentine's Day, that celebratory week. Um, on February 13th, the public integrity section is told by Emile Beauvais, again, the acting deputy attorney general at the time, that they are going to need to dismiss a very, very well documented and well evidenced bribery case against Mayor Eric Adams of New York, a man who's on tape and in documentation that they have soliciting bribes, things of value, and also, we later find out, trying to find ways to destroy the evidence, which is obstruction if proven in court. And the public integrity section, which is this elite unit created after Watergate because of what Nixon had done to ferret out, corrupt public officials. They had not run this case. The Southern District of New York had in that U.S. Attorney's Office based in Manhattan. But they said, no, we're not dismissing this case. And in one fell swoop, four leaders of that office were ushered out the door. They basically resigned rather than comply with Beauvais' order to dismiss the case. The next day, Valentine's Day, 9:15, all of the prosecutors, without any of their bosses anymore, are summoned to a Zoom or a remote virtual meeting with Beauvais. And as in their offices or in their homes, they're watching on their computer as he explains to them that he needs two people to sign the motion to dismiss this case. And if they don't, there could be consequences. And if they do, the people who step forward, we reported if the people step forward, they will become the leaders of this unit. Beauvais later testified that falsely that he had never threatened or encouraged people with punishment or with promotion to do this dismissal. The group ultimately, at the request of one of the older members, agrees to let that person sign the motion to dismiss so that they're not all fired.
And Beauvais' longtime association with the president, what about that?
Yes, Beauvais was one of Donald Trump's very valuable defense lawyers in several cases, including against Letitia James and in his battles with Jack Smith, as was Todd Blanche, who's now um, the actual Deputy Attorney General. And Beauvais, as you know, was nominated by the president for an appellate judgeship, lifetime judgeship, very high level, and confirmed.
Um, Question from Ruth. What are the chances of Bondi and maybe even Blanche, whom you just mentioned, being impeached since they're violating their oaths to the Constitution and acting like Trump's personal lawyers if the Democrats win one or both houses of Congress in the midterms? And what about them being disbarred and held in contempt?
I don't know about disbarred because you'd have to, I don't know what those chances are because I am not going to put myself in that situation of claiming I know how they may have crossed those lines. Bar counsel will have to review that if they receive a referral. But I will say that I think impeachment, the chances of that are very high. Attempt to impeach them is very high if Democrats t retake Congress. I've already heard a lot of lawmakers discussing that privately, but there's quite a drumbeat for that.
Casey wants to know, after the Nixon Watergate scandal, it became convention that the Department of Justice would operate independently of the presidency, but there was no legal framework for this convention. It seems to me it goes back further than that. It depended upon normative behavior. What legal framework would be required to mandate this? Would it require a constitutional amendment?
Yeah, I think it could require a constitutional amendment. I also think there could be another form, but it's such a good question because the sources that I talk to that are still inside the building and some that are outside trying to work together to restore this amazing institution after Trump is gone, they're constantly planning how can we make it so this doesn't ever happen again. They talk a little bit, and I'm going to use my shorthand for this for a minute, Warren. They talk about bubble wrapping the Department of Justice, something that's kind of like post Watergate on steroids, so that even though our Justice Department is part of our executive and it is not independent legally, they want to create a way in which it can't be interfered with, it can't be monkeyed with again, so that the AG will never again say, I work at the directive of the president.
Carol Kravitz wants to know, wasn't Bondi the Attorney General of Florida when Epstein and Trump were running wild partying? Assumption being made by the questioner. Did she play any role in Epstein's deal?
She didn't play any role in his deal. That was the U.S. Attorney in Florida, Alex Acosta, that I know of. She, as for her dates when she was the Florida Attorney General, I would have to look and see if this overlapped. Epstein and Trump had a very famous falling out, and I think it was around 2014 or 2015. They stopped partying together after a major dispute between them about a home, a mansion in Palm Beach that they both wanted to buy. And Epstein told one of the agents, essentially, who was handling this massive estate, that Donald Trump didn't have any money. It was all from Russia, and that they should not take his money. He didn't have it. Instead, Trump found out, and they kind of fell apart. So I don't think um, she would have had a lot of role in their part, Epstein and Trump's partying.
Several people have asked if Merrick Garland was stymied by President Biden, who told him not to pursue the Epstein matter. Is that true?
No, no. All the decisions were made by Garland, and he was very clear about that. Um, he and his deputy, Lisa Monaco, ran that ship, micromanaging in a pretty significant fashion. And Biden was true to his word. He was, by the way, President Biden was getting very frustrated with the Attorney General as time went on. People in the White House were wondering where is the beef, right? Where's the probe? But they did not try to suggest anything to him. In fact, famously, quickly, Biden one time was being asked as he got off in Marine One at the South grounds by a reporter, hey, what do you think about this effort by Congress to refer Steve Bannon for criminal referral for failing to answer congressional questions and failing to comply with a subpoena from Congress? And Biden said, yeah, I think you should be held accountable. I think you should be, prosecuted for that. And Garland's Garland and his nerve center went bananas and issued a statement immediately saying only the Department of Justice will make these decisions, period, full stop.
Rachel wants to know what role is the Chief of Staff, Susie Weil, playing, or is everything being controlled by Steve Miller?
Oh, good question. I think that the two of them, especially since the fatal shootings of protesters in Minnesota this past month, um, I think the tension between them has gotten much higher. They have a lot of respect for one another in their respective roles. Susie being kind of a big picture person and thinking about how the president looks and how things are going to stack up for the midterms, and Mr. Miller thinking about how to implement the things that will be points on the board for Trump with especially with his political base. But those fatal shootings challenged their relationship, and I'm told by sources that she was incredibly frustrated that, uh, forgive me, I have to think about the word here for a second, the way in which Stephen Miller had been so obtuse and seemingly callous about these deaths.
Uh, Paul is interested in the immunity decision. What would it take to overturn it? Can Congress legislatively reverse that decision?
I mean, conceivably, I wouldn't pretend to know how that would happen, but
Uh,
conceivably, another way would be a decision, an amendment. Another way would be another Supreme Court challenge that ultimately got to the question that never got resolved in Jack Smith's case, which was, where is the line? What is an official act? Um, because you remember the immunity decision stopped the case in its tracks because of the timeline, which is that you can't prosecute a sitting president, and by that time Trump was president. But it never ended up getting resolved in the appellate court. What is the president allowed to do that he can't be prosecuted for, and what is he not allowed to do?
okay. Michael says, what would it take to charge, indict, and convict a president for treason? And given the immunity ruling, do you think Trump would ever be held accountable for the graft he has taken during his presidency and for all of the other illegal conduct he's engaged in? That's really a two-part question.
Warren, I want to just say I try not to speculate too far ahead of my own nose. Um, I know there is a lot of discussion among Democratic policymakers that everyone in Trump's circle needs to be held to account. There have to be consequences in the future for illegal activity. I'm not going to say somebody has engaged in illegal activity without doing any investigative work, um, but there is a very robust conversation about keeping documentation of what's happened so far, where people have bent and broken the rules, and where the emoluments clause has been stretched beyond recognition. And those records are being kept and documented because people do want to hold him and almost more importantly, many of his deputies to account.
What do you think? I mean, nobody can predict the future, and I wouldn't ask you to do that. But one of our listeners wants to know, or viewers wants to know, what do you think is the next big story that's going to break? Is there anything that's sort of pending in the sidelines?
Oh boy, there's so much. And I'm not sure that my answer is going to be satisfying because I think some of the biggest stories we kind of have seen a few um we've seen quite a bit of them. I think one of the biggest stories is the immigration the eradication raids essentially, and how illegal those efforts have been, how often those have crossed the law, and also been in complete contrast with how Stephen Miller and others have described them, getting the criminals, the worst of the worst. I think there's going to be documentation and revelatory reporting for years about how misled we have been about that work, as well as how much it has cost taxpayers and the end result of it. Uh, we've had American citizens deported. We've had American citizens killed and detained. We've had children separated from their parents. We've had people who've legally been going through the asylum process, right? And so I could go on and on about that. That strikes me as the biggest story there is.
Jeffrey says, is there any chance that people who gave money to Trump enterprises or gave Trump gifts could be charged with bribery after Trump's term? What about Jeff Bezos and his Melania film?
Well, I'm going to put Bezos aside for a moment. I think that's conceivable, that people who have given to Trump enterprises, for example, there are a lot of questions about how people are obtaining pardons. People with a lot of means seem to be the people getting pardons after they hire certain well-connected attorneys. And there's a lot of talk about how are they getting that exactly, and where is all that money going? There have been discussions and reports about $2 million success fees being paid. Where is that going? Again, I think that there's a robust effort by people to document what's been happening, again, with the goal of there being consequences if there were any illegal activities.
Back to Miller et al. Could Trump give immunity to his whole staff before he leaves or pardon them in advance?
Yes, he can. It's a limitless power, and it's one that Donald Trump loves and enjoyed um, implementing as he left his first presidency and as he entered his second. Hundreds of people, um, dozens of them who had abused, beaten, and assaulted police officers were the first people that Donald Trump pardoned after his inauguration.
What are you doing now? What are your major stories for MS Now?
Because I'm fresh off this book, we released the book in November, and I joined MS Now in late September. The Justice Department is at the center of every consequential and controversial activity in this country, including the immigration raids that we've been talking about. The Pam Bondi declared in a little noticed memo in December that protesters with certain political views, interestingly, liberal political views, were domestic terrorists. And
Yeah.
so the Justice Department is at the center, really, of everything that is causing consternation in the country. This decision by the Justice Department to bless everything that the president wants to accomplish, whether that comports with the norms or the laws or not. And so that's been where I've kept my focus. trying to let the public be the beneficiary of the things I learned in the course of this book.
One person did ask if you want to say anything about the Washington Post.
Um, I'm heartbroken. I loved that paper. I love it still. It raised me. It is why I'm a good reporter. Um, uh, Heartbroken that an institution of such might and weight and importance has been laid so low by a series of just really terrible decisions. The reporters in that institution have been, and myself included, pleading for a business plan, pleading to be harnessed to find a way so that this institution could be financially solid and on its own feet. And no business plan ever came forward, no matter how long we cried for it. And in the last 2 years, since Will Lewis has been the publisher, all that's happened is we've lost enormous talent, had decimated morale, and it's hard to imagine how it will recover. Like the Department of Justice, I think it's going to take a generation.
A generation for the Department of Justice, too. Now, having heard all of that, let me remind you of the tradition that we have on this program, which is that toward the end of the program, we like to ask the guest if the guest can think of anything positive that would end the show. We do that in honor of one of our previous producers and supporters. And I'm obliged to make that suggestion.
I welcome it, Warren. I'd forgotten about the tradition, and so I really am going with my gut here. And I will just say truthfully, the one thing that has given me a lot of hope in reporting this book, despite the fact that we do call it, a tragedy in 3 acts, are the people who care so deeply about this institution, which is the anchor of our democracy, right? The reason our founders wanted to start this new country was based in fair treatment, equal treatment of all Americans, not the royals or the kings picking their favorites and benefiting them and harming their enemies. And the people who care so deeply that I've met in the course of this process of reporting out this book, they give me a lot of hope because they're still, this force to be reckoned with, even though many of them have been sidelined, forced out, etc. They are planning and plotting. Plotting sounds so evil, but they are planning and plotting for how to make this institution whole again.
And that's at the Justice Department particularly, and people beyond that as well?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It's just that I've spent, so many years now
Sure.
swimming in this particular
Yeah.
field, but that's true in intelligence, that's true at the State Department, that's true even in defense, which is a pretty conservative leaning group that kind of just follows the orders. Oh, everyone's a little bit beleaguered by and battered by this presidency, and it's given them, a real sense of mission and purpose for how to make everything strong again.
Well, thank you so much for the swimming that you were doing, and good luck for doing a lot of swimming in the future. It's wonderful to be able to talk with you again, Carol Leonnig, now with MS Now, formerly with the Washington Post, and the author of this extraordinary book, which I will hold up to, Injustice, and a wonderful name and a wonderful book. As Janice indicated at the outset, it does read like a novel, and it's hard to believe in some cases. But it turns out to be true. Carol Leonnig, thanks so much.
Warren, thank you for such a lovely set of questions.
Next week, the New Yorker staff writer Susan Glasser will be here in conversation with Madeline Brand. Collapsing norms. Can American democracy survive this stress test? That's the subject. Everybody have a good night, and thanks for being with us.